Hi, bookworms! Welcome to Full of Book Chats. Today we are interviewing Filipino American author of Arsenic and Adobo, Mia Manansala. She will be talking about the second installment to her Tita Rose's Kitchen Mystery Series, Homicide and Halo-halo. We'll also be talking about her life as an author and the importance of her Filipino heritage. Our guest for today will be interviewed by Jean Arboleda, a digital marketing manager and freelance writer. She grew up surrounded by books and has a soft spot for science fiction and mystery novels. Her current pop culture includes BTS, Critical Role, and Succession. You can find her on Twitter at Jean Arboleda and on Instagram at underscore a likely story. You might also have read some of her book reviews on fullybookedonline.com, as she is also part of Fullybook's First Look Club. Our guest, Mia P. Manansala, is a writer and book coach from Chicago who loves books, baking, and badass women. She uses humor and murder to explore aspects of the Filipino diaspora, queerness, and her millennial love for pop culture. She was shortlisted for the 2021 Goodreads Choice Award for Mystery Thriller and the 2021 CHRBY Award for Fiction by the Chicago Review of Books. She is the winner of the 2018 Hugh Halton Award, the 2018 Eleanor Taylor Bland Crime Fiction Writers of Color Award, the 2017 William F. Blake Malice Domestic Grant for Unpublished Writers, and the 2016 Mystery Writers of America Helen McLeod Scholarship. She is also a 2017 Pitch Wars alum and 2018 2020 mentor. A lover of all things geeky, Mia spends her days procrastinating, playing JRPG, reading cozy mysteries and diverse romance, and cuddling her dogs Gumiho and Max Power. You can find her on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at NPM The Writer. Her debut novel, Arsenic and Adobo, came out in May 2021 with Berkeley Penguin Random House and is the first in Tita Rose's Kitchen Mystery Series. The sequel, Homicide and Halo-halo, is already out now. You can get your own copy of these cozy mystery books at www.fullybookedonline.com and in Fullybook stores nationwide, so I suggest get yours now. Without further ado, I hope bookworms you are all ready for a cozy yet thrilling conversation between Mia and Jean.
Hello, hi Mia.
Hi, Jean. Nice to finally meet you.
Same here. We're so glad you were able to find time to do a quick interview with Fully Booked. So, first of all, how are you and where are you calling from?
I am okay, a little overwhelmed. It's been about 2 weeks since the book has come out, and I've been doing a lot of, interviews and events, but still working my day job and doing my writing. But I'm also just thrilled that the book is out in the world, and there seems to be people who have been enjoying it. As to where I'm calling from, I'm at home just outside of Chicago.
Oh, okay. So, good evening to you and good morning from us here. So, okay, next question. When was the last time you visited the Philippines?
The last time I was in the Philippines was 2014. I had spent about 3.5 years teaching English in South Korea. So before I went back home, I wanted to visit my family in the Philippines one final time because Korea is much closer to the Philippines than Chicago is. So that was the last time I was able to visit.
Yeah, the flights are shorter.
Yeah, much, much shorter, yes.
Okay, and of course, before we deep dive and discuss your books, we're just curious, what's the last Filipino food you ate?
So my mom's birthday was 2 weeks ago. So I took her out for like a birthday lunch, and she chose Max's restaurant, which we have like a branch here in Chicago. So of course we had Max's chicken and kare-kare and barbecue and chicken skin, like the chicharron, sagot gulam. Yeah, so we had like a feast, right? It was my mom's birthday, so
like
we
the
went all out.
Filipino feast.
Yeah.
I love it, like all the classics.
Yeah, exactly.
Which leads us to our next question, which is really going into your book. So the prevalent themes of your novel, family and food, they're very important touchstones in Filipino culture. And we wanted to know, did you draw on your own experience to capture the Filipino community atmosphere? Or did you do any additional research to depict this authenticity? Because it's very authentic in your novel.
So a little bit of both, honestly, because I mean, the reason I started writing is because I didn't see characters or experiences that reflected me, and I really wanted to see myself on the page. But I also wanted to be careful that I wasn't writing a self-insert character, right? Lila is not me. Like, we're not the same person. So I wanted to draw on my own experience because, I was born and raised in Chicago. I can't speak Tagalog. I can only understand it. So for me, my Filipino background and my family, how I feel about my Filipino, like my identity, they're intertwined. I cannot separate my feelings about my family from how I view myself as a Filipino, because I didn't have a Filipino community growing up. But I did grow up in a large, multi-generational household. I grew up with my maternal grandparents and my parents and my brothers and my cousins, and sometimes aunts and uncles lived with us for periods of time. So we were a very close-knit family. And so my connection to the Philippines, again, is it's my family, and it's the food that my father and grandmother cooked, that really, when I think the Philippines, that's what I think of, my family and the food that they cooked.
Yeah, I think that's part of your novel where that's how Filipinos show love through food. And speaking of like the Filipinos, you have a great cast of characters, such as the calendar girls and the titas, that hits close to home for most of your Filipino audiences. So were these references or odes to particular people in your life?
So I took some of the experiences that either I personally had or like my friends would talk about, because, aunties are almost like a universal experience,
Yes.
among Asians in general. So, like I tell people, like there's that one line in Arsenic and Adobo where Ninang April is like, "Oh, you get bigger every time I see you." And I'm like, "Oh, that's been said to me." Like I had to include that in something. But in general, I'm actually very careful to not base anyone too closely on real people, because I don't. Well, one, for me, like the fun is in creating, right? I want to make these entirely new characters, but also I didn't want to get in trouble with anyone I knew in real life to be like, "Hey, is that me? Why did you like depict me this way? Or why did you kill me off? Or why did you make me the bad guy?" I didn't want to have to deal with that kind of drama. So like I'm inspired by certain people in certain events, but I will take a very small aspect of their character. Like I've told people like Tita Rosie and how food is her love language. That's based on my dad, right? They are nothing alike personality-wise or anything, but just like that idea and that foundational element, I was inspired by my dad. Something the Lola Flor is kind of very loosely based on the grandmother that I grew up with. Again, they are not the same person, but I took certain things that were said or ways that she made me feel growing up and kind of like built around that to kind of explore certain things. But again, I made them different enough that nobody can be like, "Oh, is that grandma?" Like, no, like that.
It's just like specific elements that you were inspired by.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that you didn't want Lila to be a self-insert, but we feel that she's really such a real and complex character, and we wanted to know a little bit more about your inspiration behind creating Lila.
So she was kind of like almost like a thought, like how different would I be if I was born and raised like in a different area? So I was born and raised in Chicago, in the city proper, in a kind of like working class, majority Latina neighborhood. But my parents' friends, like the Filipino community they were part of, and the parties that we would go to that I went to growing up, they were in the suburbs where people had a little bit more money. The houses were bigger. The Filipino community was larger, but it was also majority white. And I always, felt like kind of a disconnect to some of the people I met, like, because I felt so different. And I wondered, would I be the same person if I had grown up in an area like that with those kinds of influences, I guess you could say. And so it was like a thought experiment. It's like, okay, You know, it's, you know, the Shady Palms is not, it's technically a small town, but I patterned it after some like Chicago suburbs. I gave her the experiences that I knew certain people who grew up that way had, and like, and how would she, in what ways would we be similar, and what ways would we deviate? You know, similar things would be the idea of being like a big fish in a small pond.
Yeah.
You know, because in my, you know, like, again, even though I grew up in such a big city, my area was really quite small, and the expectations were very low for the people that lived there. Like, if you graduated from high school without getting pregnant, you were like, oh, good job. You know, there weren't high expectations for you. Whereas for her, you know, the expectations are equally low, but in a different way, right? You were expected to get married young, stay in the town, have babies, and just, you know, do the same thing that everyone else did day after day. And so, you know, the idea, the feeling of being like trapped, but in different ways, like I felt like that's how I related to her, particularly at that age. Like, now that I'm older, I realized that was a very kind of narrow-minded way of thinking. But, you know, when you're a teenager, when you're fresh out of college, you know, the way you see the world is quite different.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting conflict and how that played out, especially like with her friendship with Adina. So, in your current book, your second book, Homicide and Halo-halo, you went into pageants, and pageants are a big deal for Filipinos, and it's a big part of Filipino culture. We're very into pageants. We wanted to know what made you decide to focus on pageants in particular for your story.
I've actually kind of been fascinated, like, because I've always wondered why, you know, Filipinos and like Filipino diaspora are so in love with pageants. Like, my mom, like, doesn't care about fashion. She doesn't really care about getting dressed up or anything, but she would love watching them, and she still watches them every year. And she's like, "Oh, Miss Philippines made it to this round," or, oh, you know, like, she was like, she would always get so proud of being able to talk up, you know, even though like like in your everyday life, she doesn't care about these kinds of things. But when it's pageant time, like, she would always make time to watch it. And,
Lights
you know,
up.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And for me, you know, I grew up as the kind of person, like, I played a lot of sports growing up. I was not particularly like graceful or, you know, I was actually pretty geeky as a kid. So for me, I'm like, I don't get it. Like, what's the big deal? And then as I got older, and I noticed like there's, you know, it was such like an integral part of the culture. Like, almost everybody seemed to be into it, and so many beauty queens seemed to come from. I was like, why? So I wanted to research that and find out, like, is there actually a reason the Philippines loves, you know, beauty pageants so much? You know, like, I didn't want to be like, oh, because people are only attracted to appearances and they're like really like shallow, and like, I knew it had to be deeper than that. So I started doing research into it. Plus, I also, you know, I love the movies, like the Sandra Bullock movie, Miss Congeniality.
Oh yeah,
Another movie
that's a
like
classic.
Drop Dead Gorgeous, where like they're like there's mysteries there, but it's also a comedy, but there's also bits of romance. So like, I knew it would be a really great setting, like, for my books, where I can kind of tackle all these different elements.
Especially in like a small town setting. It's
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah, if there's something that the Philippines and small towns have in common, like in the US, like, love like beauty pageants. There'll be a beauty
That's
pageant
the
for
thing in
everything.
common.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So, can you tell us a bit more about what it's like, or what it was like writing about your heritage in your books?
It was, before being published, it was just something I always naturally did. Because again, the whole point of me writing was for me to see the books that I've always wanted to read. But after I got my deal, there was like a lot of pressure to make sure I was getting the representation right. You know, there is so little like mainstream representation in the US of, you know, Filipinos, Filipino Americans, that I wanted, there was like an unfair pressure that is placed upon writers of color or people from marginalized backgrounds in the US, of having to be like almost of like the voice of that part. You know, like, I am not the voice of like Filipino Americans, right? Because we all have such different experiences. We are not a monolith. But at the same time, I also realized, like, well, there are certain things that we all share, of course. And when I was writing, and particularly when I was like revising, I wanted to make sure that, yes, I am filtering this from my point of view and my experiences, and that makes it authentic. But am I being biased, right? Because I'm only one person.
Mm-hmm.
So I had, so for Arsenic and Adobo in particular, I had a sensitivity reader from the Philippines, so from Homeland Filipino, because I wanted to be like, am I being as like objective as possible in how I'm portraying these different generations of Filipinos, right? Because again, Lila is like me, born and raised in the US, but the aunties and her grandmother, like, they are immigrants from the Philippines. So their experiences are not my experiences. And I wanted to make sure I wasn't making them flat or, stereotypical, right? Like, there are things that we all like, oh yeah, gossipy aunties, like, it's a stereotype for a reason, but you don't want them to be just like a caricature. Like, I wanted them to feel like real people. So I needed an outside perspective to make sure I was doing that.
That's really interesting, like having someone be there to give you like an extra layer of awareness to understand. But yeah, I feel like that's a lot of pressure for Filipino authors, especially in the US. And how has the response been like from other Filipinos, both in the diaspora communities and in the Philippines? Like, have you received feedback directly? Did you feel the need to write something that accurately represents your community, which kind of ties back into what we were discussing earlier?
Like, to be honest, I was most afraid of feedback from the Filipino community, because I know, from talking to other people who, other people who, it's your own community judges you the harshest, whether fair or not. And again, in many ways, I understand that. Again, there's so little representation.
Yeah.
Where, like, if you're like, oh my God, there's actually like a mainstream Filipino genre book, I've never seen this, and you put certain expectations on it, you put certain hopes on it, and you read it, and it's not what you wanted. And it's like, oh, it's almost like the author let you down because you wanted it to be this thing. Which, again, fair, but also unfair, because I cannot write to your expectations. I can only write to my own viewpoint. But I've been very lucky. Oh, I'm like trying not to jinx myself. Like the messages I've gotten, or the social media posts that I've been tagged in, for the most part, the Filipino and Filipino diaspora communities have been so kind to me. They've been really supportive. They've sent me like these wonderful messages that like make me cry just thinking about it. It's like, oh, like, I've never been able to see, my culture in a book like this, or you made me feel seen, or like, sometimes they'll share very personal things where it's like, oh my God, I can't believe you trust me enough to be this vulnerable with me. Thank you. So for the most part, I've actually had just really wonderful experiences. I'm kind of shocked, but I'm so thrilled.
Yeah. And yeah, I think there's definitely that pressure where, the few Filipino authors have to be perfect. They have to get it right. But we personally think you're doing a great job. So,
oh, thank you.
So I guess that goes into like our next section, where we wanted you to talk a bit more about you as a writer, as an author, and how do you think being Asian American has influenced your writing?
So, not necessarily my writing, but how it's been perceived. So again, it's never been like a question in my mind whether or not I was going to write Filipino American characters, because that's what I want to see. Like, that, I feel like there's not enough of it. And, if you're Filipino American, you don't have to write Filipino. Like, you should be able to write whatever you want. But for me personally, I knew that's something I wanted to bring to just like mainstream genre audiences. And so Arsenic and Adobo was my debut, but it wasn't the first book that I've finished. It wasn't the first book I had with an agent, or that I've tried to get published. I actually had one more book before this, called like Death Comes to Comic-Con. And it was, again, it was a traditional mystery, not cozy, but still traditional, like amateur sleuth, humorous, where, like a queer Filipino American millennial was solving a murder mystery at a comic book convention. And so it, it got me early attention. As I mentioned, it got me my first literary agent and representation. But when she tried to sell it, there were some issues in the industry. I got close several times. I found like my agent was able to connect with editors who really enjoyed what I was doing. They really liked the voice. They thought I was doing like a fresh, fun take on the genre. But for people who are not aware, in most like large publishing companies, you have to do more than just convince the editor. You have to convince the sales team that you are a good investment, that your book is worth acquiring. And the acquisitions period, or like, the money thing, basically, that's where my book kept dying, because they said that I had no audience. As a younger, shall I say, like not young, younger Filipino American writing traditional mystery, they said they didn't know how to market my kind of stories. They thought that nobody would be wanting to read the kind of stuff that I wrote. They told me I should probably write YA because it's more diverse there. One editor, which my agent forwarded that email, went so far to say as traditional mystery is for older white women. And that I yeah, and then there was that there was no market for my story. Yeah, and again, as a I've been reading mysteries my whole life. My mom is the one who got me into mysteries, particularly cozy mystery. A lot of my friends who are people, so I'm like, I know that's not true, but at that level in publishing, that's what they believed, that I was a bad investment because there was no way to market me. This was like 2018, so it wasn't that long ago,
Oh, wow. That's pretty recent.
Yeah. But while I was getting all those rejections, I was getting rejected for a year and a half on that book. So while those rejections were happening, I was writing the book that would become Arsenic and Adobo. Because, in the writing industry, you can't just sit and wait. You got to keep, working
Hustling.
on the next. Yeah, exactly. And when I finished Arsenic and Adobo, I sent it to that agent, my first agent. I keep saying first for a reason. And she didn't like it. So we eventually had to part ways, amicably. There were specific reasons why we both agreed that we were no longer, aligned in our vision for my career. So I found a new agent, luckily, and she managed to sell the book in 2 weeks, which is it's so rare. Most books take months, if sometimes even years to sell. But I guess like I wrote this book at just the right time, because my publisher was specifically looking for books like mine. They realized how narrow-minded publishing had been to only market to older white audiences. And they were specifically looking for millennials, and particularly millennials of color, to give like a different spin to cozies, because they wanted to expand their readership. So like when my agent sent them my book, they're like, oh my God, this is exactly what we were looking for. So, I went from being told like I had no audience and nobody would ever want my books, to like, your book is the exact book we started this entire imprint for. We can't wait. And we're so excited. So like in those few, I sold that book in 2020. So like in the 2 years between me trying to sell the first book and me trying to sell the second, like there was been a change.
So yeah, I mean, very fortuitous turn of events, and we're glad that it all turned out. Of course, awful to hear how we got here, like all of that, like gatekeeping that you kind of had to fight through. And you did mention that you've loved cozy mysteries and wanted to talk a little bit more about that genre. It's pretty unique because it seems to bring together two opposing ideas, like comfort and discomfort. What attracted you to this genre, and which novels or writers served as your inspiration?
So I think it is because of those like opposing ideas. Because what I love about mystery is like the puzzle aspect. I actually really like trying to figure things out. Like I play a lot of like puzzle games, and so I'm that person who's reading and actually trying to solve it at the same time. But I also I really I think there's just so much value in entertainment and like escapist fiction. So sometimes I don't want that hard, gritty, realistic take on a murder or crime. because I feel like, you know, in real life, crime often, you know, justice is not always served. And I know that in my everyday life, and I don't want that necessarily in my fiction, especially now when I'm trying to find more hopeful, uplifting kind of stories. And I think cozy mysteries are a great way to tackle some serious issues without being like heavy-handed. You know, the humor and the lightness, you get to slip certain ideas in, because you know, because people are being entertained, they're not being like lectured or you know, it's not a textbook, but I still get to talk about things that are important to me. And the humor in particular is what drew me to it, because you know, I and many people I know, like, humor is a defense mechanism, right? When things are difficult, when you're uncomfortable, humor, like, you know, sarcasm and humor and making that joke to lighten the mood, that feels very natural to me. So being able to take something that is so horrible and so, these are just things that happen to regular people in a small community, but being able to lighten it and, I don't know, and show that there are different aspects, and to draw out like the character studies of these different people. And I find it fascinating.
Perfect. And yeah, you've mentioned in a couple of interviews that Homicide and Halo-halo was written during the pandemic. How did being indoors and the state of the world affect your process? This is a pretty heavy question, but
Yeah.
yeah, we wanted to see like how different was writing this book compared to when you're writing Arsenic and Adobo.
Yeah. I like to be very honest about this, because, you know, a lot of times people only see the finished product, you know, especially like up and coming writers. And I think, you know, it's a disservice for them to like not know what they're getting into. So even before the pandemic, before I had my own book deal, I've been lucky enough to have writer friends who are further in their career than me. And they help me out. They teach me things that they think it's important for me to know. So like I knew about, you know, second book syndrome is what a lot of us call it, where the second book is usually much, much harder to write than the first. It's for several reasons, you know. Like, for example, like Arsenic and Adobo, I told you it took me 1.5 years to write to finish a draft. And then I was able to polish it and make it good. And, you know, because nobody was waiting for it really. But your book 2, that's under contract and you have a deadline.
So there's a lot more pressure.
Yeah. And my books come out fairly quickly. You know, Homicide and Halo-halo came out 9 months after Arsenic and Adobo, which means I had to write that book in less than 9 months, because you have to write the book, and then we have something called developmental edits, and then copy edits, and then there's so many stages to it. So the time it takes for me to actually write the book was maybe 6 months, 7 months. So time was an issue. And then there's like the pressure, right? You know, again, the first book, I wrote that for me and my mom, because I didn't know it was going to get published. I was just like, I'm going to write something that makes me happy. I want to write something that I know that mommy has always wanted to read. I'm going to have fun with this. With book 2, it's like, oh, well, now I have to meet like my publisher's expectations. You know, Arsenic and Adobo wasn't even out yet, but people, you know, they saw the cover, they heard the title, they found out there was a Filipino main character, and they were so excited for it, which was, you know, it was so heartwarming, but it was also like, what if I let them down? What if I get them so excited and like I don't deliver? You know, what if I only had one book in me, you know, and this second book failed, you know, like those kinds of thoughts, you know, were in my head. And, you know, that's just like naturally as a writer, you throw in like the pandemic, you know, the uncertainty. I lost my job. I got laid off at the beginning of the pandemic.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear.
Oh, thanks. I was an English language instructor at an international language school. So no more international travel and students. No need for that school, so they closed that branch down. So I found out I was getting laid off the same day I signed my contract for the books. And so, you know, so it's just like, oh, this enormous pressure of like, now I don't have job stability. What if I can only rely on this for an income? How long will it take me to find another job? You know, there were just all those doubts in my mind. So the fact that I completed this book and then it's out in the world, and you know, there are people who are messaging me and telling me how much it meant to them, because I do touch on things like mental health and you know, PTSD, and the idea of like reaching out and accepting help when it's offered to you. You know, some like people are like, oh, you know, I'm so glad you wrote it. Like it really resonated with me. And I was just like, you know, I didn't think I was going to be able to do it. And I did. And it's out in the world. And so very much a roller coaster of a book. You know, there, in some ways, you know, I think about, again, I think as a writer, like you always want to reach higher and higher. And I think there were like certain things that I wasn't able to accomplish with the book just because of the time and the skills that I was lacking. But for the time that I had, in the mental space that I was in, I am genuinely really proud of what I managed to put out.
Yeah, I mean, in less than 9 months,
Yeah,
you came out with your second novel. It's crazy to think about. So what were some of the other, I know you've already talked a lot about the challenges, but what were the other challenges you encountered when you're writing this series, if there are any? And what were your favorite parts or moments during the entire thing?
So I think one of the things I didn't like, again, it's you know something logically, but then when you're actually going through it, right, it hits different. So like I knew from other friends who write series that like the challenges of overlapping, right? So particularly, you know, so I was editing and promoting book 1 while writing book 2. And then, you know, I just turned in book 3 at the beginning of this month. So, you know, like promoting book 1, editing book 2, writing book 3. So there's never like any downtime. I'm always looking ahead to the next thing. Like I'm already about to start writing book 4. Book 4 doesn't come out till sometime next year, but it makes it hard to really be in the moment and enjoy what's happening. You know, like last year was my debut. It, you know, I finally achieved a lifelong dream. I wanted to be a writer since I was a child. And in many ways I did, of course, you know, I did enjoy so much of it, but I also feel like I spent so much of it overwhelmed. Because even good things can be overwhelming and scary. I spent so much of it just thinking of the next thing. It's like, okay, I did this, now what? Okay, now what? Okay, now, and instead of just being like, wow, you managed to accomplish this thing. Celebrate that, acknowledge that, you know?
Like savor the moment.
Exactly. You know, it's one of those things like not everybody can do this. Not everybody achieves their dream. And you know, and I was just like, oh, okay, that's cool. Whatever. I did it next. And that's such a terrible way to, you know, to think of that, because this is such a special moment in my life. So like this year, I'm trying to be better about it, right? I'm trying to like slow down. And even if like my workload isn't getting any lighter, I'm trying to give myself like more mental space and be more kind to myself if I can't, you know, hit a certain goal or do a certain thing that I really want. And it's just like, well, okay, but you did this and that's great, you know. Like the best things, I mean, definitely like the reader react. Again, like it is, books are such a special thing to me, you know, like they've saved me so many times. They've been my friend throughout my life. And so being able to be that for someone else, you know, like hearing like, oh, I've been going through a really rough time and, you know, I picked up your book and it made me laugh and thank you so much. I'm like, I'm tearing up just thinking about like they're like, I've gotten emails like that. And, you know, I work at a library and like fellow librarian told me a story that a friend told her. She's like, oh, I have to tell you this. My friend, you know, read your book and she's been having such a rough year. She's lost a few people that she's close to and she hasn't been able to read in a long time. Your book was the first she picked up in months. And, you know, and she said it gave her the escape she needed. And I was just like, you know, like, you know, at the end of the day, like I wrote like, you know, a light, fluffy, entertaining book, which I think is good and I'm proud of. But like, you know, I didn't think I wrote anything groundbreaking or life changing. But for some people, it was what they needed. And that means so much to me.
That's really heartwarming to hear. And speaking of reader reactions to your novels, your books have made quite a buzz on social media. Like I see them a lot on Bookstagram or on Book Talk. How does the online book community and online book reviews affect you as an author?
As an author, I try to be careful to not like intrude in what I feel like are reader spaces, right? You know, because like once I cannot control how people feel or connect or don't connect to my book. and I don't want the, if they see my name in there, like maybe they're like, oh, I don't want to say this because I don't want to like hurt her. Like I don't want to feel like I'm intruding in a space where people are trying to have a genuine conversation, right? Like that's not for me. That's a reader space. But like if I'm being tagged in something and it's like a lovely picture, or like I try not to read what they're saying, but sometimes I'll see like a really nice thing at the top and I'm like, okay, let me see what this says, and like, oh, that's lovely, and I'll try to leave a comment. I get tagged in a lot of like negative and mixed reviews, and I'm just like, well, I'm not going to engage because I don't like I can't really say anything.
That sounds awful to tag someone just to be negative.
Again, it's like you can think and feel and say whatever you want about it because it's valid. That's fine, but I'm just like, oh, but I don't need to see that, like I don't, I'm just trying to enjoy my pretty pictures on Instagram and enjoy my friends. I'm just like, oh, okay. But there's a difference between like valid critique, like I've gotten messages like, hey, I don't like the way you handled or represented this particular issue. I thought, it was wrong, and it was misrepresentative and actually kind of harmful. And, those, like, while they're hard to hear, I'm just like, oh, you're right. I did not handle that well. I am so sorry. Thank you for letting me know so that I can learn and do better in the future. Like those, okay, yeah, DM me to let me know that that's completely fair. But if it's like, if the book wasn't for you, I mean, then it's not for you. That's fine. But I don't know. I don't need it in my notifications, I guess.
That's true. We don't need that on our feed.
Yeah. Again, like your feed, you do whatever you want. On my feed, I would prefer to not see that.
That's true. That's valid.
Yeah.
So did you always want to be a writer? And now that, this is what you do for a living, how does the reality of it line up with how you thought it would be, like your imaginations and your aspirations?
So, as I mentioned, I did always want to be a writer as a child, but I never thought it was like a career choice for me. It was like I knew I loved writing, but I just didn't think that would be something I'd be able to do. Like I always thought I'd have to have a more like solid, career path. But I still went like, so like I majored in English, which is like the study of literature and things like that. Because like I'm like, what am I good at? I'm like reading and writing. But can I make a career out of that? Well, teaching and things like that. So that's where I went because it was a little bit more stable. But one day I don't know, my life had felt kind of stagnant. Like it was just the same thing over and over, and I wasn't changing or growing. And I was like, well, remember that you used to love writing? Why don't you just do something for yourself? It doesn't have to, it could stay a hobby, but why don't you try finishing a story for once? Because up until the book before Arsenic and Adobo, I had never finished a story in my life. If it wasn't for school, so I was like, okay, why not? So like, I took a class that happened to be a mystery writing class. So even though mystery was like always one of my favorite genres to read, I didn't think I would be a mystery writer because it always seemed too hard for me. I kind of thought I would be like a fantasy writer, particularly kidlit, like middle grade, because like those are the ones that kind of like expanded my world and kind of opened my eyes. But I kind of fell into it where I took that class, and the teacher of that class, her name is Lori Rader Day. She saw what I was writing and she was like, is this your first time? I was like, yeah. She was just like, I think you've got something. Like, I think you're a mystery writer, and she really encouraged me going forward. It's thanks to her and like other people in the crime writing community that like I kept on going even after like all those rejections and like some of the cruel like gatekeeping and things like that. And now that I am a writer, I think one of the hardest things, and this is because like I have like a Discord chat with like all my fellow like Berkeley debuts. Like we talk about this because we can be honest with each other. One of like the biggest things is like you think once you achieve your dream that your life is going to change completely, right? Like that everything's gonna fall into place and everything's gonna be happy and perfect, and then you wake up the day after your book comes out and like your life is the same, like nothing, like your life is basically the same. People's world keeps people's world is not spinning around you and the fact that you release the book. They're like, oh, congratulations, and they go about their life, and then you're just like, oh, like such a momentous thing has happened. Why is why has nothing really changed? And that's because, like, as wonderful as it is, it's a job, like just like any other. And
That's true.
and moving from like, this is a thing I love to do, to this is a thing I love to do, but it's also work. And I can't just sit around waiting till I feel like writing or till I feel inspired. I have deadlines now. I have people counting on me now. So I have to just, keep on going. You lose a little bit of the magic, but at the same time, like, you gain so much. Like the fact, like my community means so much. Like all my writer friends, all the readers who have taken the time to message me and let me know, I wouldn't trade that for anything.
That's true, because it's been a job, but it's a very fulfilling job, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess in relation to that, I wanted to know, what's your advice to aspiring Filipino authors who are also dreaming of getting their books published?
So connected to what I just said, like, build your community and build it early. If you can, if it's possible, make sure it's a mix of people who are at the same level as you, just because it's so amazing to watch each other like grow and change. And because only people who are kind of at the same level, you kind of understand what you're going through, right? Like people who have published like 10 books, they might not remember what it's like. Querying was very different then when they were doing it. Publishing as an industry has changed in that time. So people who kind of understand where you are in your journey is so helpful. But that being said, also, like, if you can find people who are a little bit further than you, because I was very lucky to have like published writers who took the time to talk to me and cheer me on and let me know, like, hey, this industry is tough. This industry is really opaque. Here are some things that you should know that you wouldn't think to ask, So I had people looking out for me in that way. And then, writing can be very lonely. And particularly if you are writing from a non-white, non-US background, publishing can be really harsh and unforgiving. So finding the people who understand you, who are willing to champion you, who are willing to challenge you, because, we're not always right,
Mm-hmm.
having people call you out when you need to be called out, like finding, it's so valuable. You need those people along the way. I never would have made it this far. I honestly don't think I would have had the willpower to keep on pushing if I didn't have people being like, I've read your writing. I know you're good. You just have to keep on. Don't let these people tell you that you have no audience. Don't let these people tell you that, you'll never publish a mystery. Like, you've got what it takes. Just keep on pushing. And, I hope you find the people who do that for you.
Yeah, definitely. You need to have the right support. And I'm glad that you were able to find that. So finally, we wanted to learn more about your third book. What can we expect from Blackmail and Bibingka? I love this title. The third book in Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mystery Series.
Yeah, coming up with the titles is honestly the most fun. Usually titles are really hard, but because I've kind of landed on the whole like crime word and Filipino word, I get to come up with all these like really interesting combinations. So this book was so much fun to write because it takes place around Christmas, which I know is the big deal in the Philippines.
Yes.
And because earlier you asked me, like, are you writing from your own experience or did you do research? For this one, I actually had to do quite a bit of research because like Christmas is important to my family, but we don't go all out the way that I know many Filipino families do. So like so like I did some research about it. I talked to like my brother's fiance, like her family is like super into Christmas, and she taught me about like Simbang Gabi and all that. So I'm like, oh, okay,
all the
cool.
traditions.
Yeah, all the traditions. I was like, all I knew was like, like bibingka, aparo, like really, really basic surface level kinds of things. So learning more about the traditions and how it's just like such a festive time. I was like, oh, this, so having like that fun setting with like intense family drama, because in book 3, Lila's cousin Ronnie, who like I've alluded to in the previous 2 books, Tita Rosie's only child, comes back to town after having ghosted the family, I think maybe like 15 years ago. And, he promises, like he's back for good. He's solid. He's landed on his feet. But Lila doesn't trust him. Because she knows that like wherever he goes, trouble follows. And she's right. Soon after he returns, Tita Rosie starts getting blackmail letters about her son and hinting like menacingly at something that Ronnie did wrong in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And then shortly after that, there's another murder of one of his investors because he's bought a winery in town, and he becomes the main suspect. And so even though Lila doesn't quite trust him, for Tita Rosie's sake, knowing how much it means to her, she gets involved and tries to clear his name.
Oof, we can't wait to get our hands on that. So thanks, Mia. And before we let you go, we wanted to do a quick fast talk. So just a bunch of quick fire questions. Okay, let's go. What Filipino food is perfect for binge watching a true crime series?
Oh man, like the terrible person to me. Like I immediately went to like Dinuguan. I don't know, like I thought blood and true crime, and I was like, Dinuguan, maybe? I don't know.
Maybe. It's the blood. It's the pig blood.
Yeah.
Okay, next. What Filipino food is perfect for family reunions?
Ooh. I think I'm gonna be stereotypical and say lechon, right? There's just something just like so like inviting and festive when you see like the whole roast pig there and everyone's just like gathering together, just like fighting over the best parts,
Just like the big centerpiece on the
Exactly.
table. What Filipino food is perfect for a first date?
Again, I think I'm gonna have to go boring and say halo-halo. I think like because like just like being able to share, like the glass together.
Oh, that's
it's
kind of romantic.
Cute. Yeah, it's a little bit romantic and cute, because other things I'm like, I was like, oh, maybe like street food, like things like pick up, like no, there's nothing really too sexy about like the skewers and like no, okay, halo-halo, that's cute. You can share that.
Okay,
Yeah.
That's cute. And finally, what Filipino food is perfect for comforting a friend?
For me, things that are very comforting. And if I'm comforting a friend, it's probably over heartbreak and it's going to be sweets. I'm going to say like ginitang halo-halo or ginitang mais. Like just like this creamy, warm, sweet, simple, but satisfying kind of like, like when you have like first spoonful, like I feel like that's how I feel when I eat it. And I would hope that, it would help my friends in their time in need.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good choice. What Filipino food is perfect for writing a novel? Like when you were writing your novel, did you have any specific cravings?
Oh, probably like ensaimada. Like if I wanted to take like a break, like I would usually make myself, like I always need caffeine and I always need sugar when I'm writing. So I'm like a cup of coffee or tea and like ensaimada topped with cheese. Like that was like my go-to.
It's a good combo. Now I'm hungry. Okay, so our next round would be for this or that and top 3. So this or that, paperback or hardcover?
Hardcover. I really like the way they look.
This or that, read one book at a time or multiple books at the same time?
I used to be a one book at a time reader, but now I have like zero attention span. And I also have like multiple things that I read for different reasons. Like, is it research? Am I blurbing? Is this for fun? So now I'm multiple books at a time.
Okay. This or that, write all day or test recipes all day?
Oh, test recipes all day. Definitely. It's like my
that one was
favorite
easy.
Yeah. Because I can be like, oh, I'm not procrastinating. I'm working on a recipe for the new book.
This is research.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's not just I just want to eat cake. It's research. Yeah.
Okay, next question. Top 3 books that you always recommend?
Ooh, top 3. I would say this one's cheating because it's a whole series. The Lady Sherlock books by Sherry Thomas. It's like a gender bent take on the Sherlock Holmes stories. They're so good. If you love mystery and like slow burn romance, excellent series. I also recommend the my mentor Kelly Garrett's books, particularly the Detective by Day series. Like those are the books that really helped me see how we can kind of push the like edgy cozy, how you can kind of push the boundaries of what people think a cozy mystery is. How you can put like the humor, a slightly younger voice, a protagonist who's a woman of color. It taught me so much reading those books. So I even if she wasn't my friend and mentor, I always talk up the Kelly Garrett Detective by Day series. Hollywood Homicide and Hollywood Ending are the two books. And the third one, I'm gonna go romance because it's been helping me a lot during this pandemic. Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. I read it like a million times in the last year. It hits on all my favorite tropes. And it's just fun and sexy and smart, and it makes me so happy.
Okay, great choices. And now we're moving on to favorite writers. Top 3 favorite writers.
So I mentioned Sherry Thomas. And I would say Neil Gaiman was a very early influence, because I said that before, like I didn't only write mystery, like so I love how he writes in every genre, every age category, every medium, but his voice is still so distinctive. Like I would love to become my own version of that someday. And then oh man, this is always hard too, because you have friends who are writers and I'm just like, oh, which one do I know? I think right now, again, because of what I write, I think I really want to shout out Gigi Pondian. She's mixed like a Indian American woman who writes, again, kind of like me, like mysteries that are never just like one thing. They kind of like they genre blend, but they're also traditional. There's a little bit of humor, there's a little bit of food, there's a lot of family drama. So I'm really loving her work right now.
Okay, great choices again. Our next question is, if you could only eat one Filipino meal every day for your whole life, what would it be?
So that's an interesting question, because kare-kare is probably my favorite food, but I think like that'd be like too much for every day. I think like the perfect Filipino meal would be like long silog, just like the longanisa, the fried egg, the garlic fried rice, and like a spicy vinegar dipping sauce, like to really like cut that richness. I think it's like a perfect meal.
And how about for dessert? Like if you could only choose one.
Ooh, oh man, I could only choose one. Either ensaymada or ginitang halo-halo, because I really love, like, I don't know, the bilo-bilo are like my favorite, but I also love, like, again, like I really love just like creamy coconut milk. I find it comforting, and all the elements keep it interesting for me. So yeah, off the top of my head, that's what I'm going with.
I'm sorry, I know that was a tough one.
I know. I'm like, oh my god, only one. How?
Okay, next question. Describe your next book in just 3 words.
Christmas family drama.
Ooh, intriguing. Good choice. Good choice. And finally, our signature question. We always end with this one. Do you judge a book by its cover?
Sometimes. I'm not gonna lie, most of the time. Well, because the cover is what will initially draw me in. I'll glance at it and be like, ooh, what is that? Especially on social media or just like even in the bookstore. But I do always read what it's about, right? It'll catch my attention, but I don't buy books solely because of the cover. But it will push me over if I'm just like, oh, I mean, this sounds okay, and then I see the cover, I'm like, oh, okay, never mind. This looks great.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mia. We're so glad you're able to find time. We love your books here in the Philippines, and we're so excited to read more. So for everyone who's watching, Arsenic and Adobo is available on Flibook. online and in stores. Yes, let's show off our copies. And you can also order Homicide and Halo-halo with Fully Booked as well. And stay tuned for Blackmail and Bibinka. So that sounds really exciting.
Thank
Thank you
you
again, Mia.
Thanks for having me. This was so much fun. I was glad we were able to work out, the time difference and everything.
Yes, perfect. And thanks for joining us today, everyone. Bye.